Hello and welcome to Alligator Bioscience's interim report call for the second quarter of 2025. My name is Greta Hög. I'm the IR and Communications Manager at Alligator, and I will be introducing today's call. With me today are our CEO, Søren Bregenholt, and our CFO, Johan Giléus. They will walk you through the latest developments from the quarter and the upcoming news flow, after which they will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Now, before we begin, I would like to share a quick reminder that during today's call, management may make forward-looking statements that involve known and unknown risks, uncertainties, and other important factors beyond the company's control that could cause the company's actual results, performance, or achievements to be materially different from the expected results, performance, or achievements expressed or implied by such forward-looking statements. These statements are subject to risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results to differ materially from those contained in the forward-looking statements. Actual results and the timing of certain events may differ materially from the results or timings predicted or implied by such forward-looking statements, and reported results should not be considered as an indication of future performance. Please note that these forward-looking statements made during this call speak only as of today's date, and the company undertakes no obligation to update them to reflect subsequent events or circumstances other than to the extent required by law. This call is being webcast and will also be made available through the Investor Relations section of our website. Now, with the formalities out of the way, I would like to turn the call over to you, Søren.
Thank you, Greta, and once again, welcome to Alligator's Q2 2025 earnings call. It's a pleasure being with you again. Could we have the first slide of the session, Greta, to sum up some of the key updates from the quarter? I think it's important to first and foremost mention that we have advanced mitazalimab, our lead asset, according to plans. During the quarter, we have been granted a so-called pediatric waiver from EMA, the European Medicines Agency, and more importantly, the EMA has also, as part of our our scientific advice process with the EMA, endorsed both the phase 3 protocol and the phase 3 dose. And likewise, in an interaction during Q2, FDA also confirmed 900 microgram as the recommended phase 3 dose. If we take a broader look at the regulatory advice that we have received on mitazalimab, both in terms of phase 3 protocol, phase 3 dose, CMC, and also the non-clinical phase 3 readiness of mitazalimab, there is a very high degree of alignment between what we've heard from European agencies, EMA, Paul Ehrlich in Germany, and FDA. And this, of course, forms the basis of a single global phase 3 development program for mitazalimab, which is very important. To facilitate this, we have also manufactured GMP material with an updated process to support both the phase 3 study, but also the commercial supply of the molecule. And that process is very nicely developed, been validated to its current use, and the drug supply for the phase 3 study has been secured. Further on mitazalimab, we've had the pleasure to discuss new biomarker data at ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology Conference in Chicago, and also a couple of weeks ago in Barcelona at a European meeting. This biomarker data importantly supports future patient selection strategies. It validates the mechanism of action and immune activation of mitazalimab, and this, together with the clinical trial data that we have released earlier, continues to strengthen the case for mitazalimab as a relevant first-line medication in metastatic pancreatic cancer. Together, this data has also strengthened the academic interest in the molecule, and as we alluded to in the Q2 report, we have a number of proposals for so-called investigator-initiated clinical trials that we are evaluating, and we will engage in a number of selected trials during the second half of 2025 to explore further and strengthen further the mechanistic understanding of mitazalimab, both in pancreatic cancer, but definitely also in an effort to increase the strength of the molecule in other indications. If we look at the more finance business development side of things, we raised 61 million SEK in our TO12, which is a clear sign of continued shareholder support. Our partnering discussions about mitazalimab and also a few of our other assets have continued both at ASCO and BIO and following that. And then importantly, in alignment with our cost reduction program, we have now reduced the burn rate substantially below what we have seen in previous years, where we have supported both OPTIMIZE-1 and the CMC development and manufacturing, and we are now expecting a burn rate in the range of 20 to 25 million SEK per quarter. And then, of course, our out-licensed product, HLX22, has received orphan designation in Europe and have also initiated a second phase 2 study in HER2-positive breast cancer. So all in all, a lot of positive developments in Alligator during Q2 2025. So if we could have the next slide, Greta. So just to remind you that mitazalimab is our phase 3 ready lead asset. So just discussed strong clinical data, strong safety data, strong biomarker data, and generally phase 3 ready. We're also developing ATOR-4066, which is a second generation or third generation, actually, CD40 bispecific antibody. And I'm pleased to share with you that the data from mitazalimab has really generated increased interest in this molecule and interest that led to a number of advanced discussions, both at ASCO and also at BIO. And then in the partner programs, we already discussed HLX22, which is now starting a global phase 3 study in gastric cancers. So still a pipeline focused on mitazalimab, but with a number of strategic options to provide and support long-term shareholder value in the company. So the next slide, please. Yeah, this is really just to remind ourselves that mitazalimab actually does make a significant change in first-line metastatic pancreatic cancer. Not only do we change or add approximately 4 months to the median overall survival in this very hard-to-treat cancer, but importantly, when we compare to FOLFIRINOX, the chemotherapy backbone that these patients are treated with, we see significant increases in the survival rates at 18 and 24 months. So that if you get mitazalimab in combination with the chemotherapy, your chance of being alive 18 months after diagnosis is double that of chemo alone, and up to 3 times at 24 months. So really strong data. And why do we believe that this translates into phase 3 success? I think that this is also important to emphasize. We have previously showed that these becomes statistically significant by inter-trial comparison. We published those data early in the year. Very importantly, the patient population that we used in this study is very, very similar, if not exactly similar, to what you can expect in a global phase 3 study. Median overall survival is going to be the primary endpoint in that phase 3 study, and we've shown significant a significant delta from chemotherapy there. And then you remember we have this treatment schedule where we give a primer dose of mitazalimab, and that is a treatment schedule that we are taking with us into phase 3. Hence, all the parameters that I mentioned bodes well for a positive outcome of the phase 3 study. If we take the next slide, I just wanted to maybe talk a little bit about some of the biomarker data that we discussed at ASCO earlier in the summer here, early June. It's of course always important to find first of all markers that correlates or relates your mechanism of action and your clinical outcome very well. And then if you can even find biomarkers where you can start to pre-select patients based on a certain, for instance, a gene signature. So if we look at this slide here, if we just look at the middle, the way that mitazalimab works, and we discussed this at several quarterly calls, is threefold. First of all, mitazalimab start to degrade the stroma in the tumor, making the tumor more permeable to chemotherapy, to subsequent the mitazalimab, and also to T-cell infiltration. And then mitazalimab strengthens the immune system to activate and educate T-cells to eventually kill the tumor cells and provide the patients with a clinical benefit. So one very important step in actually proving this hypothesis is to go back in the tumor of patients from the clinical study and do comparison in their tumors before treatment and after treatment. And some of the data that we presented at ASCO, you can see on the right side here, and without getting too technical, what this actually shows is that in a number of patients that did respond to mitazalimab had a durable clinical benefit, we could see that when you compared tumor biopsies before the start of treatment and around the time of response, there was very, very strong indication of a positive activation of both the dendritic cells, the macrophages, and also the T cells. So this fits very, very well with that specific mechanism of mitazalimab to activate the myeloid and T cell mediated immune system. What we have on the left-hand side here is a piece of work that is very important, and we may be able to select patients on that in the future of mitazalimab development, where we show that patients with a certain gene signature that is exactly associated with the fibrosis or the connective tissues in the tumor, that patients with a certain gene signature here respond significantly better than patients that do not have this gene signature. So that's the patient indicated by the green line here in this Kaplan-Meier plot versus the patients in red here that don't have the signature. So a very important piece of data that again confirms the mechanism of action of mitazalimab and also provides some sort of strategic guidance on a patient stratification strategy in the future. So very important two pieces of data here, and we have more biomarker data that we expect to be able to publish in scientific journals within the coming period. So I will leave you with this piece of data on mitazalimab and just remind you that we also at the ESMO meeting in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago presented the data showing a very clear dose relation between the 450 and the 900 microgram dose cohorts, showing that the 900 microgram was significantly better than the 450, hence leading to FDA and EMA's endorsement of 900 as the clinical dose or as the dose for phase 3. But also importantly, this data underscores the fact that you have actually, when you have a dose effect of something, also like mitazalimab in this case, of course, also means that that there is a direct contribution of the drug to the clinical results you see. So, a summary of the regulatory status on this slide, just to remind ourselves and repeat that during Q2, FDA endorsed the 900 microgram phase 3 dose, and that EMEA importantly gave us input on the phase 3 protocol, dose, and the phase 3 readiness of mitazalimab that was in line with what we've seen from FDA. And then we can remind ourselves that from the phase 3 study, we now have 900 microgram agreed as the phase 3 dose. We have a study design protocol that is acceptable for phase 3 and subsequent registrational applications in both agencies, and the non-clinical program is adequate also for phase 3 and subsequent applications. And on CMC, we have agreement with analytical method specifications, comparability strategy, etc. for the phase 3 material, and these data and this strategy is adequate for BLA and MAA submission when we get to that point. Okay, enough said today about mitazalimab. Let's just spend a little bit of time on HLX22. I understand that this is becoming a hot topic discussing Alligator. So the antibody itself is a monoclonal anti-HER2 monoclonal antibody that is differentiated from existing HER2 molecules based on its epitope. It's currently being developed by Shanghai Henlius in a number of trials. The drug was originally developed by AbClon in collaboration with Alligator. Hence, Alligator is entitled to 35% of AbClon's revenue from their partnership with HLX22. There's been a lot of numbers floating around, or estimates, especially by AbClon, on what could the peak sales of HLX22 be. It's currently being developed in gastric cancers in phase 3 and also in HER2 positive breast cancer. Numbers have been as high as $10 billion has been mentioned. Alligators, without mentioning any numbers, our estimation are a bit more conservative, but we think that this molecule provides or constitutes a potential significant long-term upside to the company. In terms of development timeline, as you understand, this is developed by Henlius, and we have no reason to second-guess development timelines that are being communicated by Henlius. And in terms of, just to make that absolutely clear, in terms of our communication policy around this molecule, as I think I indicated several times, we are working this molecule, owning this molecule, access to this molecule at an arm's length. So we are going to report significant regulatory events such as orphan drug designations, start of clinical trials, so on and so forth. But we are not going to communicate on or comment on market estimates like the one you have on the screen here. So let's go on with this. I hand over the word to Johan to take you through the Q2 financials.
Thank you, Søren. Happy to be on this call. Focusing on the Q2 numbers, then we have incurred operational costs, the more general operating cost, of course, but also then the clinical trial cost for OPTIMIZE-1 and the IMP production then for the phase 3. All in all, that has incurred 34 million in cost for the Q2, but we have also then made a reversal of the write-down relating to HLX22, hence why we're coming with operating profit of -22. I will come back to the HLX22 in the next slide. We have also another non-financial item which is related to the TO12 and TO13, which were issued free of charge in connection with our units issue in February, and these are the revalued, in particular the TO13 that still remain at the balance sheet end at fair market value, and hence provide some non-cash financial items during the quarter. Also to be clear that we have, as a part of the redundancy program that we launched in December, have now seen the remaining employees leaving the company during the Q2 then, and hence will also lower the cost going forward then. So please move over to the next slide, please, Greta. So what you can see here on the graph that we have a trailing effect on the operating cost going down. But as Søren mentioned before, we are aiming towards 20 to 25 per quarter in H2 2025 and onwards. And I think that is relating back to the optimized one trial cost is wrapping up, and IMT has more or less been manufactured, and there are some stability costs that will be during the second half then. We have a liquidity of around 24 million, and we have then funds that we believe will come in from the TO13 together with the liquidity position that we have now, that we have financial flexibility for the rest of the 2025 then. And of course, as we always say, that we are looking into different venues then for financing, including the TO13, but also other avenues of financing. When it comes to HLX 2022, I think it's worth mentioning then that we have revalued the asset, and we have done the reversal of the write-down, and that has then come up to a number that with 12 million in a let's call it a write-up. This is also limited by the fact what the initial book value of the asset was. We believe there's more value to the asset on top of that, but that's according to the regulatory environment that we under IFRS, etc. We are not allowed to do that at least that's not as a first step here now. With that, let's move over to the next slide, please. So just as a starter then for TO13, this process will be very similar to the TO12. We will have an pricing period. In this case, will start at 14th of August and end 27th August. And we will then be able to communicate the price in around the 28th of August then. And as also for the TO12 then, and linked to the reversal of the share split that we did, you need to have 1,000 warrants to sign up for one new share then, and that can then happen during the exercise period that starts 1st of September and ends around the 15th of September. And as noted here, there's a last day of trading if you want to buy or sell shares, or sorry, the TO13, and of course some of the banks have different cutoff dates, so you please make sure that you're not are missing out on this opportunity then. And we can hopefully then announce something around the 17th of September with the outcome of this exercise of the TO13. With that, I think I hand over to you, Søren.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, basically, as I think we are moving forward with mitazalimab, so far we have completed all the milestones with the drug for 2025 as expected, including data readout and regulatory interactions. Right now, what we are focusing on is, of course, getting the last bits and pieces for for the phase 3 readiness in terms of CRO discussions and what have you, getting that ready. And then the main focus is, of course, on partnering and business development discussions that are ongoing, both with long-term interested partners and also with new partners that have entered the process just recently. And just to reiterate that, we are continuing several tracks of discussion, both a global partnership, but there might also be opportunities or solutions that includes one or two regional partnerships for mitazalimab. And I'm sure that you will have some questions about that. So I think I'll save my voice for that and go directly to the questions. And we will do this as we normally do. We have received a number of questions. I will go through them. I will try to group them a little bit as good as I can, and answer some of them and defer some of them to you, Johan. So you better be on your toes. The first question here is from Philip Lindqvist at Redeye, directly on the question of business development, and it goes like this: can you comment on the current status of your business development discussions around mitazalimab and whether you see a licensing agreement or trade sale as the most likely path forward at this point? As I said, we are discussing with several potential partners, both global companies and also more regional companies, and we are even as late as this week welcoming new potential partners into our data room in a diligence effort. So that is progressing as we expected. These things, and I'm telling you, from 25 years in the industry, these things are of course always progressing slower than you would like them to. But that is the name of the game here. Whether a licensing agreement or trade sale is the most likely outcome, that's impossible for me to comment on. First of all, because it could be either, and I can simply not tell you what is more likely. And secondly, I'm not going to stand here and reveal any potential negotiation tactics and put pressures on potential partners here. So I think we leave this part of the question sort of unanswered. Of course, the financial dynamics when you look at the intrinsic value of the program and the market cap of Alligator might tilt you towards thinking that a trade sale might be the most likely, but that's from a pure financial angle. Then we go on with Philip here. You recently attended BIO International and ESMO GI, yes, and before that ASCO. Could you share your main impressions or takeaway from these conferences, particularly in terms of partner interest and emerging trends relevant to Alligator? And I think there's a few questions about that later on. But first of all, I think the data that we showed both at ASCO and at ESMO GI, and I revealed some of it here, and some of it has been discussed on the CDA as it's not yet been published. But I think we are now at a very, very fortunate situation that we can explain exactly link exactly the mechanism of action of mitazalimab, what we see in subsets of patients, and I showed you some of the data here, and the effect on clinical outcome in these patients. And being able to mechanistically make that connection is of course very convincing, and something that is important for potential partners and is highly valued in their assessment of the drug. And I think there is a question from Kempen about why we stand out with from other CD40s, and it's clear that none of the CD40 antibodies that has previously been tested in pancreatic cancer have shown such a manageable safety profile as mitazalimab, which is also something that has been again discussed at the scientific meetings, and nobody has really seen the long-term survival benefit with other CD40 antibodies as we have seen. Primarily because the patients have not tolerated the drugs for so long is my own assessment there. And now that you asked, Philip, let me also mention that mitazalimab and OPTIMIZE-1 was specifically mentioned at the keynote talk at ESMO GI only last week, emphasizing the study as being a very sort of exemplary piece of work, taking preclinical evidence, combining that with a very good molecule, and then conducting a high-quality trial. So I think that's a kudos to the entire Alligator team. Now let's move on here. Another question from Philip. From a CMC and regulatory perspective, would you consider mitazalimab phase 3 ready today, or are additional activities required before initiating a pivotal trial? Yes, we would definitely see mitazalimab as phase 3 ready. Yet there is still a few things that needs to be done. The drug product and the drug substance is on so-called stability studies that needs to be completed during Q3 and Q4, and there's a few bits and pieces here that needs to be done. But all in all, we are ready to start a phase 3 trial once we have a partner on board. Then we have a couple of questions for you, Johan. Can you elaborate on the financial situation? How critical is the contribution from the TO13s to secure additional funding?
I think we stick with the previous guidance that we have said that we need some uptake, prudent assumptions around the TO13 to manage 2025. Yeah, and also to you, how much of the loan to Fenja remains? That's 23 million SEK in the loan as such, and then we have both prepaid certain additional costs, and also some of the costs are deferred to the end of the loan period. Okay. And a third one to you. Now we have you here, Johan. Yep. Could you give some more details on the condition under which the acquired participation in development projects have improved? I guess that's the write-up in the books. And that relates to HLX22, but maybe you can give an explanation here. Yeah, exactly. I did some explanation during the slides, but in addition to that, I give some background that one of the key assumptions that has changed is that the molecule now is in phase 3 for gastric cancer, which of course then lower the risk and move everything forward. And secondly, they have now introduced a second indication in breast cancer, which also then added value to the value assumptions that we have provided them. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, and this is from Redeye Richard here, a little bit of a long question. In the latest press release, AbClon mentions a peak sale potential of $10 billion for HLX 2022, which corresponds to $500 million.
This implies a royalty rate of around 8% when factoring in Alligator's 35%. Is this a reasonable interpretation? I think I'll give this a shot. First of all, as I said, the 10 billion, I think our assumption or our estimate is a little bit more conservative than 10 billion, although this is definitely a significant opportunity. I would say, although we cannot comment on any of the deals, especially not those between, or the financials of any of the deals, especially not those between AbClon and Henlius, I think the 500 million includes the 35% that needs to be paid to Alligator, and from there you can make your own assumptions around the top royalty rate of that contract. Can you agree with that, Johan?
I fully agree.
Then we go to a set of questions from the Kempen or Van Lanschot Kempen team, and I think we have already touched on this, but I will bring it up again. Can you please remind us of how mitazalimab safety and efficacy profile differs from other CD40 agonists, and whether this has been a factor in your BD discussion? Yeah, again, we see mitazalimab with a very manageable safety profile, not adding any significant tolerability signals on top of FOLFIRINOX, and this is at a pre-medication regime of only antihistamines and anti-leukotrienes, so no corticosteroids here. So first of all, a very manageable safety profile, which really sets mitazalimab apart from both first and second generation CD40 antibodies. And this has of course been a significant factor in our BD discussions, because these side effects has really hindered the continued development of many of these CD40 antibodies. And in terms of efficacy, what we see there now is that we have patients that have been on drug for over 3 years. We have seen patients that have been on only mitazalimab, no chemotherapy, for a year and a half up to 2 years. And together with the general efficacy data that we discussed today, this simply sets mitazalimab apart from other CD40 agonists. Then there's another question here from Sebastian and team. In terms of the phase 3 design, to what extent has there been agreement on the final design with FDA? We have agreed the design with FDA, and we have also agreed that design with EMA. And I would say the feedback from the two agencies are very much aligned. Can you provide some insights to the number of patients that would be required from such study? Yeah, we are talking around 550 patients. So this is of course a significant trial, but still smaller than, for instance, what Ipsen did with their Napoli 3 study, which, as I recorded, was around 800 patients. The study is going to be, of course, randomized across 2 arms, but it's not going to be blinded, which is, of course, an operational benefit from Alligator and a partner. And a single study is sufficient for approval. The next question, also from Sebastian and team here. Given the results of CD40 and PDAC, has there been any interest of a partner to take over the asset for development in other therapeutic areas? I think I'll answer this question in 2 parts. No, there's not been anybody interested in taking over mitazalimab outside of PDAC. as the primary driver. But there's definitely been significant discussions on what is the next set of potential indications where mitazalimab would make sense. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is that coming back to what I said before, there's significant interest from investigators, physicians around the world to explore mitazalimab in other indications, and we are in dialogue with a handful of these to select a set of trials that can do one or two things: either give us more understanding of how mitazalimab works in patients with pancreatic cancer, or secondly, and maybe more interesting in a global perspective, try mitazalimab as an add-on to existing therapies in other indications. That could be gastric cancer, that could be biliary tract cancer, that might even be breast cancer. So we're pursuing these opportunities and expect to have some news about this during the last 2 quarters of the year. Then a very important question here, also from this insightful team here: do you anticipate that the emerging data from RAS inhibitors, KRAS inhibitors, in second line is likely to change treatment paradigm in first line PDAC? I think there is no doubt that the KRAS inhibitors will be approved in second line, and I think eventually they will also be approved in first line, of course, at a later time point than second line. This will be an add-on. I think we have to realize that the chemotherapies are always going to be the backbone. I'm sure that the KRAS will become add-ons to chemotherapy in first line, and add benefit to the patients. But I'm also pretty sure that if you are going to see the sustained clinical benefit that we see in OPTIMIZE-1, then you need an agent added on to chemotherapy KRAS inhibitor that activates the immune system. So regardless of the advent of KRAS inhibitors in the second and first line metastatic pancreatic cancer, I'm absolutely sure that there is an important role for mitazalimab to play in these patients in the future, and that's why we're developing the drug. Then, Johan, there is a question for you. What would be the cash runway based on the current spending and expected subscription of the TO13 warrants?
I think we already answered that, but it's with the prudent assumption around the TO13 and the cash spend that we also then disclosed to 20-25 per quarter. We think that we have the runway for end of 2025.
Good. Then we have a couple of questions here in the QA webinar from the Hatmaker. Okay, yeah. The R&D is extremely well, but what is your plan B if no agreement is signed before TO13? As the proceeds from TO13 might just get you proceeds of 10 to 20 million based on the share price and probably high cost for any guarantors willing to undertake it. And a similar question, how much more from the same Hatmaker here, how much money do you think will come in from the TO13, Johan? I think those are for you.
Yeah. Little too early to say, but I think we have already started the work, and of course we have a plan A that we're working on, but also then looking very prudently into different other scenarios then. But let us come back to that. I think it's too early to say.
Yeah. And then there are no more questions in today's call. So thank you, Johan, thank you, Greta, and thank you especially to all those of you who have followed the call. And we look forward to continue updating you with data from mitazalimab and the rest of the portfolio. So thanks a lot and have a lovely summer.
Thank you. Happy summer.